Welcome everyone to the Climate Chatter webinar on the topic of plastic. It's great to have so many of you join today. My name is Julia Hunziker. I'm a sustainability advisor here at South Pole, and I will be your host this afternoon and lead you through the different presentations and the Q&A. Before we start, I'd quickly like to mention some housekeeping rules. As attendees, you're all on mute now, but if you have any comment or question, please use the question box at the right. Ramon is supporting me in the background and will help you with technical difficulties as soon as possible. Topic-related questions will be answered in the Q&A session at the end. And if we cannot answer your question in the Q&A, we will get in touch with you via email. Most of us are broadcasting from our homes, so in case there are any technical issues, please bear with us. And for those of you who do not know South Pole yet, just a short introduction about us. We were founded in 2006 and are at the origin developers of carbon compensation projects. Over the last 14 years, we have, however, expanded our services a lot and now work with large corporates and public organizations to support them on every stage of their climate leadership journey. We are over 300 sustainability professionals in 18 offices worldwide, and we all have the common goal of combating climate change and accelerating the transition to a climate smart society. So much about South Pole and what is expecting you today. We will have 3 inputs on the plastic challenge and potential solutions. First by Patrick Berge, co-founder of South Pole and director of funds and platforms, followed by John Duncan, lead of the initiative No Plastic in Nature at WWF, and Steve Hardman, chairman of Plastic Collectives. To make things interactive, we have also prepared some polls for you that we will launch after the presentation. Then we will have the chance to hear Giorgio Zagami, CPO and Vice President Procurement and Logistics at MSC Cruise Group, speak about challenges and solutions in the plastic space at MSC. Already now, a big thank you to all of our speakers. We're really excited to have you on board today, and we look forward to your presentations. After the presentations and the poll, we will have an open Q&A. Please add your questions in the box, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible. And before I finally give the word to Patrick, I'd like to share the results of the questions we have asked you when registering for the event. We got over 180 answers to our question, the first one being, how important are plastic-related challenges in your company and daily work compared to climate-related challenges? About 27% said that it's smaller or much smaller, 38% said that it's about the same, and over 34% said that it's higher or much higher. So we see that we have a really heterogeneous group here in terms of plastics. We have also asked you what questions you would like to get answered at this event. Examples were how to speed up the currently available initiatives on plastic reduction, what are smart examples of market-based, community-driven solutions to the plastic challenge, what are the latest updates on plastic credits, methodologies, and standards, or what more can we as a company do and where do business opportunities come in? And last but not least, what are others doing and which solutions sound promising? We hope that we can provide you with some answers to these questions and maybe even to some more questions in the next 1.5 hours. And with this, I'm delighted to give the virtual floor to Patrick. Patrick, the stage is yours.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Julia. I saw that the participant numbers is still going up, so I think some people are still logging in. Nevertheless, I'll start, and before I jump into my presentation, I wanted to share a few thoughts with you about South Pole's motivation to join the plastics universe. Because as you know, as a company, we have started on climate change and made a very conscious decision last year to start working on plastics as well. And one of the motivations for us to add plastics to the list of challenges that we would like to tackle as a company is the fact that plastics and climate change are closely connected. So there are statistics out there that say that without significant action, the plastics value chain could account for up to 15% of global CO2 emissions by 2050. So it can be quite a significant source of CO2. And then another strong motivation for us are the very clear parallels between climate and plastic stewardship. We believe that there are many lessons that can be easily be transferred from 2 decades of work on climate change leadership by corporates to the plastic space, which I think in our opinion is still playing a bit of catch up with the climate change universe. It's probably, I don't know, 10 years behind if you look at the standards and the infrastructure that exists for climate change. And among all these lessons learned that we can transfer from climate change are also best practices around carbon neutrality that we can transfer to plastic neutrality, which is the main topic of today's webinar. So that's just to give you a bit of context on why we decided to join the Plastics Challenge. And I think, as you can see here in the picture, another, probably the most important motivation for us as very, passionate people about the environment is the sheer scale of the plastic pollution crisis. I think it's quite clear when looking at such pictures. This is a massive problem, and we need all hands on deck to solve it. And we believe that our experience with market-based instruments and with the development of environmental projects in the developing world can make an important contribution to this challenge. So if we look at the momentum that plastics had last year, I think it would be fair to say that in terms of the sustainability discussion or sustainability agenda of companies, it was on par with climate change. So it was very visible in the public debate. And we explained this growing momentum behind the desire by companies to tackle the plastic crisis based on 3 major developments. One is growing scientific evidence about the scale and impacts of plastic pollution on our oceans, our rivers, our health, and so on. Then we see also increased public pressure by NGOs and consumers alike, asking companies and governments to take action. And in response to that, there is also a growing body of regulation and policies being implemented, not only in the developed world, but also in many developing countries, including things like banning single-use plastics or EPR schemes, like extended producer responsibility schemes. And these 3 developments translate then into 2 main drivers that we see within corporate sustainability strategies at the moment. One driver is the desire to avoid plastic pollution or leakage of plastic to nature. The other driver is the desire to move towards a circular economy approach. And depending on your preference as a company and your priorities, you may tackle things like plastic stewardship or plastic neutrality in a slightly different way. And we'll give you a couple of examples along the way. So these 2 drivers that I explained in the last slide in corporate sustainability, they can also be clearly observed in recent years across a number of initiatives that popped up, all dedicated to ending plastics pollution and transitioning towards a circular economy. Among the most successful of these initiatives is the New Plastics Economy by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which has gathered already the support of more than 450 organizations under its global commitment platform. This includes commitments by brands and packaging producers representing roughly 20% of the global plastics value chain, with commitments to move towards fully reusable, recyclable, or compostable packaging. And this shows very clearly that the plastics agenda has clearly climbed to the top of the corporate sustainability agenda in recent years and became really a mainstream topic. So we're talking really here about 20% of the entire plastics value chain already committed to the cause. But then the question is, how do we translate this ambition into action, and where do we see some gaps in the market? And there are clear gaps in terms, I think, of definitions, standards, really, I think, vital market infrastructure that we have, for example, in climate change, what we don't see in markets. However, despite of the early stage in the space, we see already many companies moving ahead with very bold commitments around plastics, including several claims and pledges towards plastic neutrality, including the brands that you see on this slide as concrete examples. And when we talk about this missing infrastructure in comparison to the climate change universe, we would like to highlight two missing pieces. One would be a standard to account for plastic footprints and to get those plastic footprints certified. That, I think, would bring a lot of transparency and more accountability to the plastics discussion. And the other concept is, I think, would be the analogy to carbon credits. And this would be basically financial incentives to implement more plastic collection and recycling in developing countries. And one of our biggest hopes to fill these two gaps is the RRR initiative that was launched last year by this group of actors that you see here in the slide, including a very good mix of NGOs, Vera as a standard setting body. I think we have someone from Vera also attending the webinar who can help me with some technical questions in the Q&A. But we also have, I think, already from day one, actually endorsements from these big brands that you see here on the slide. And South Pole has been involved also from day one as a founding advisory member of the initiative. So as I mentioned before, the RRR initiative is currently developing two main things, and both are scheduled to be launched officially in January 2021. So we're still in the development phase. One of the main outputs will be a set of corporate reporting guidelines to help companies calculate and verify their plastic footprint, including circularity indicators over time. The initiative will also consider whether these guidelines should cover other aspects, such as plastic leakage assessments, to help companies identify potential risks and prioritize collection and recycling efforts. And last but not least, the initiative will also explore potential approaches and partnerships around disclosure of targets and measures by companies, which is also, I think, an important piece of infrastructure that is missing in plastic stewardship. And we believe that at the end of the day, a robust approach towards periodic plastic footprints under these the corporate reporting guidelines will represent a very important first step towards credible plastic neutrality claims. The second major output, which you see on the right side, is the Plastic Project Accounting Standard, or in short, Plastic Standard, and the related crediting mechanism, which has the aim to incentivize new plastic collection and recycling activities, especially in the developing world where plastic leakage to nature is a big problem. And the plastic standard will work in a similar way like carbon credits, and it will issue essentially two types of credits. We will have a waste recovery credit to incentivize the collection of plastic beyond what is already being done today. And then we will also have recycling credits as an incentive, or let's say to measuring the impact of 1 ton of recycled plastic beyond the business as usual scenario. The next slide, you see how the plastic credits can help companies with their claims towards plastic neutrality. So starting with the driver number 1, avoidance of plastic pollution. Here, most companies concerned about the topic would have already waste reduction strategies in place, or they might be covered in many countries by extended producer responsibility schemes or producer responsibility organizations. And these efforts, which are crucial, can then be complemented by waste recovery credits, allowing companies then to move to claims like net zero plastic waste or one in, one out claims. And on the when we talk about circular economy transition and claims in that area, companies can do a lot to reduce their plastic footprint or become more circular in changing the way that they design their products and packaging. For example, using less plastic or transitioning to alternative materials, going towards reuse business models. And then they can also complement these efforts with recycling credits, moving then to claims like net plastic neutral or circular plastic. So this shows you how the credits can help companies with their claims. And to illustrate that, based on the example of the recycling credits, you see how this could look like for a hypothetical company. So let's assume this is a yogurt company. They expect to grow their yogurt sales over time. So that's their expected product output over time. And they can then, through alternative packaging or design changes like lightweighting or reuse business models, moving, for example, from plastic to reusable glass cups, they can already reduce a lot of their footprint. If they still have plastic cups, they can further reduce the usage of virgin plastic by increasing the recycled content in the yogurt cups. And last but not least, the gap remaining now between this yellow line and zero can be complemented with recycling credits, which in this case would allow the company to achieve a net plastic neutrality in 2025, just as a hypothetical example. Next slide, please. And on this slide, you see some of the key considerations and some open questions that we still have around the concept. A few words of caution. So first of all, it's important to note, similar to the logic or the recommendations we always make on climate change, a credible reduction and avoidance strategy is always the first step. So companies have to prioritize internal measures and get a grip on reducing their plastic footprint before they consider plastic credits. And the plastic credits should never be seen as an easy way out or as a way to do greenwashing, but we want to see this as a tool to unlock finance for high quality projects, especially in the developing world where this finance is needed. We also need to acknowledge, when thinking about plastic stewardship, we need a science-based approach to potential trade-offs and plastic stewardship. To give you an example, if you shift from plastic to glass, you may run into the problem that the alternative material you're using might be more carbon intensive. So sometimes you're trying to solve one problem, but you create another one. So that's important to be aware of these trade-offs. And one thing that will be, I think, quite particular about plastic credits is the fact that there will be a higher emphasis on social safeguards, because we will have to engage very actively with the waste pickers and the informal sector in the developing world, looking at issues like child labor, proper working conditions, and so on. And then I think under food for thought, there are a few other issues that we need to tackle, like the interaction between these plastic credits and EPR schemes. There is a lot of work to be done in terms of harmonizing terminology, developing the standards, getting the claims right, working on labels, and so on. So that's all evolving, and your input here is very welcome during this webinar. As mentioned, I think at the very beginning, I think there are many, many lessons and pitfalls that we had in climate change that we should avoid, or things that we should transfer that worked well. So that I think we should try to get things right from day one and on plastics. And now I come to the final slides, just to give you a sneak preview of the offering being developed by South Pole at the moment. So similar to our offering on climate change, we are working on what we call the plastics leadership journey. So developing a whole set of services to help companies measure their footprints and assess their risks related to plastic. Then also helping them with developing roadmaps and setting targets for reduction, for example. Then actually helping them implement reduction measures internally. Also help them through things like plastic credits and the RRR initiative, help them to finance plastic action beyond their boundaries. And last but not least, also help companies in communication and leadership efforts. And this is my last slide. It highlights a little bit the three main offerings that we're developing. So we are working on pipeline of projects on the RRR that will deliver plastic credits. We will be working on advisory services related to plastic stewardship along the journey that I just showed to you. And last but not least, we are also working on the concept of a plastic fund to help pre-finance collection and recycling activities in the developing world before they can actually issue credits and get that additional revenue from plastic credits. And with that, I close. I hope I was on time. And then if you have any questions, happy to discuss them in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for this great introduction. I hope we were able to give you a good understanding of South Pole's current work around plastic. And without much further ado, I'd like to pass over to John Duncan. John, the word is yours. We cannot hear you yet.
There we go. I couldn't unmute. I was the organizer wouldn't let me. Thanks very much, and for this opportunity. Yeah, I think maybe Ramon would kick off. We haven't got too much time. Please jump onto the next slide. I think a lot of where WWF is coming from is covered to some extent in Patrick's earlier slide, but it's always really important when talking about plastics to recognize that we have to look at the kind of holistic picture, and I think a lot of the hype around plastics to date has been focused around the biodiversity issues, but we really need to recognize that there are a number of areas which plastic pollution has an impact. Patrick's already mentioned some of the climate impacts, but I think also looking at the economic impacts on a number of sectors, including things like fisheries and tourism, and then looking at the social impacts. And I think, as you can see in the picture there, a significant amount of people around the world live in situations where waste management does not happen, or the waste collection does not happen. And associated with that, there are a number of negative kind of challenges that many of these people face, both in terms of health, but also just in terms of quality of life. So addressing plastic pollution has a number of drivers or reasons why we want to address it. Next slide, please. And importantly, I think a lot of the narrative is often focused on this issue of waste management. And typically the idea is that the challenge lies mainly in the developing world with waste management, and it's not a developed world problem. But I think it's really important to recognize that that is not the case. Plastic really is a global challenge, and not simply because we have these kind of systems behind what we can see of waste exports, for example, from the developed to the developing world, where the burden of plastic pollution is just kind of transferred behind the scenes to the developing world countries. But also even in the developed world, where countries are managing plastic waste themselves, the solutions that we currently have of landfill, for example, or incineration, even with energy recovery, all have their challenges associated with them and can't be considered a really circular solution to the plastics problem. Next slide, please. And also what we've seen coming forward over the last couple of years is a number of organizations claiming to have the silver bullet in terms of how to address plastic pollution. And it's really important to recognize that there simply is not a simple solution to the challenge of plastic pollution. And maybe just to dig into some of these kind of examples here, the often kind of championed cause of going plastic free, I think we need to recognize that, particularly at a time like this when we have the challenge of the COVID pandemic around, plastic does have a really important role to play in a number of applications, ranging from medical applications to food safety and food waste, and also reducing emissions. We have to recognize that we have working within one planet here, and it's no good solving a plastic pollution problem but creating a climate crisis. Another kind of popular area of interest is around biodegradable plastics. And I think it's again important to highlight here that the technology at present is not as good as we would like to think it is, and in many cases, cannot meet the claims of actually really being biodegradable in natural conditions. And importantly, at the same time, there are very few places in the world that actually have the kind of infrastructure to manage biodegradable plastics properly through kind of industrial composting facilities. The other kind of big focus of a lot of organizations' work is obviously recycling. And it's critical to recognize that recycling will be a key part of the solution. But I think if you look at some of the stats highlighted here, only 14% of plastic is currently collected for recycling globally. And I think it's only 9% that is actually ending up being recycled. So even if you triple that amount of plastic being collected, we still have a significant way to go to actually address the plastic pollution problem. And one of the reasons why we're unlikely to be able to achieve those levels of kind of collection and recycling is that plastic is very low value, particularly the stuff that we're finding leaking out into the ocean, really low value stuff that it doesn't make economic sense for people to collect and recycle. And lastly, I think, maybe just to look at something like bioplastics, which is also gaining in interest. I think if responsibly sourced, some bioplastics can help in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of of plastics, but it doesn't solve the plastic pollution end of life problems that are associated with plastics. So, a solution to the plastic pollution problem really has to be holistic. Next slide, please. And in order to kind of really understand what the solutions are, it's really critical to understand, obviously, what the causes of the problem are. And essentially, at high level, we're looking at four key challenges here. One, I think we're all aware of the fact that economic growth is outpacing the capacity of many nations to manage the waste that we are generating, and that's particularly true in the developing world. The second one, again, we're all part of this, is consumer demand for convenient, typically single-use applications of plastics. Another big challenge is the cost of plastic, and that it does not currently incorporate any of the externalities that we've discussed already. It's particularly at this point in time where some oil price is going into negative territory at times. It is so cheap to produce things out of plastic, and none of those costs incorporate the impacts, whether they be climate or biodiversity related. And lastly, we live in this global world, but we don't have a global framework to manage all of the different types of plastics that are being traded across it. And so what you see is plastic developed in one country where there may be recycling infrastructure for it, is being traded into another country where none of that infrastructure exists. And there are no accountability systems that ensure that the company who's doing that trading is actually taking responsibility for putting it onto a market where none of that infrastructure exists. So that leads us to the question then on, what are the solutions? And very tightly linked to the causes, really, we need to be looking at the changing the design of the products and the systems, trying to increase the circularity there. We need to be changing the cost of plastic. One of the key reasons why you would use less plastic would be because it costs you more. And that cost needs to incorporate all of the externalities that we've already discussed. We also need to be looking at changing the rules that govern global plastic production, use, and our ultimate management, end-of-life management. as I said, this is one of the biggest gaps that we have in terms of global frameworks at this point in time. Many of the other major pollutants in the world are covered under some form of global agreement. Plastic is not one of those. And then ultimately, we also need to recognize that a number of countries do need support in terms of helping them establish more effective waste management systems. And that's another point of almost immediate intervention where, particularly in the developing world, a lot of that leakage is taking place. Next slide, please. So the question is, what should business be doing about this? And I think Patrick's already outlined, a kind of a high level what I think everyone believes business should be doing around this. But from a WWF perspective, I think the key aspect is we need to be setting targets and measuring ourselves publicly against the progress towards those targets. And one of the platforms that WWF have created is our Resource Plastic program, which is run out of our US office, which is doing exactly that. And that's a really important part of the process. There's kind of, it's all well and good to set a target, but it's really important to communicate publicly how you're doing against those targets. And then how do you actually make progress against your targets? It's the typical kind of reduce, reuse, recycle approach, which I think we're all relatively familiar with within our own internal operations. But it's also about then supporting EPR and investing in waste management systems beyond your own immediate supply chain. And then further than that, it's about advocacy. And I think a number of the big companies around the world working in this space really do need to be advocating for the kind of global framework which we need to help create a level playing field for all of the different actors in this field. Next slide, please, Rohan. Thanks. And so in particular, South Pole asked me to give some ideas or thoughts around plastic neutrality for this webinar. And I wanted to highlight a couple of, first some of the challenges and then potentially some of the opportunities. So I think high level, one of the most important things when looking at plastic neutrality or plastic crediting is that we don't want it to create a distraction from a company's own actions. Your own footprint must be where you need to start in terms of reduction or addressing the plastic. And that's the reduce, reuse, recycle within your own operations, and then within your own supply chain and supporting things like EPR. And it's only once you've done everything you can to address your own plastic footprint that you should be looking to offset through the use of something like a plastic credit. I think there's also a real risk of around terminology. The use of a word like plastic neutrality suggests that a company might be able to actually kind of collect back all of the plastic that it itself puts onto the market. In the carbon space, it is potentially possible because all carbon tons are the same essentially, whereas in plastic it is not the same. And so we would support more the use of a word like crediting as opposed to something like neutrality, which could be misleading. And related to this, I think the devil really is in the details. You, as a company, if you want to claim a credit for plastic that you've put onto the market, it's really important that that credit is generated in the same geography that you put the plastic onto the market and is made up of kind of plastic that is recycled of the same type and quality of the plastic that you put onto the market. So you don't want companies to be able to put a non-recyclable product onto a market in a developing world country and then get a credit for that plastic by collecting very recyclable plastic in a developed world economy. So those two need to match up. In going back to my original point about addressing your own footprint first, we do believe that you need to show what you are doing in terms of your own operations first, and you shouldn't combine your any plastic credits into your overall footprint. They should be reported separately so that everyone can get an idea of what you're doing internally as well. And then lastly, I think a risk which we need to keep our eye on is around definitions, because I think recovery and recycle can mean lots of different things to different people, and not all forms of recovery and recycling would be acceptable to all of us. And I think something like incineration may be considered recycling by some people, but I think in many parts of the world, that's not considered a circular solution or a recycling, an option that we would be supportive of. Last slide, please, Roman. So, bearing in mind that the challenges, I think you know, we are at an interesting time in the development of this plastic neutrality, or plastic crediting, I should probably say, concept. And I think important to highlight the opportunities. Like we've seen with the carbon space, the carbon crediting has helped to kind of provide a standard approach to this and reduce confusion. And it also enables a kind of strategic alignment across multiple initiatives so that everyone is talking about the same thing when they're talking about a plastic credit. It can help to improve transparency. I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we face in the plastic space at this point in time, is a lack of transparency, whether that's because of the challenges that companies face in terms of actually getting the detailed information together, or whether it's because companies aren't ready to share that publicly. I think, you know, starting down the road of introducing plastic credits would require companies to also then be transparent on their own internal footprints, which I think is a really positive step forward. And lastly, I think, you know, this goes to my point about, you know, trying to increase the price or the cost of plastic. I think, you know, credits are an approach to doing that, where you're starting to enable, you know, funds to flow towards, you know, the positive social and environmental projects out there that really do need the support of the companies who are creating the plastic in the first place. So there is it could provide a really credible mechanism to support the meaningful projects out there. But lastly, I think, you know, that's put that little logo down the bottom right there, because I think this is that critical junction that we have to really stop, think about what it is we want to achieve, and what are the kind of potential implications of what we're working on here, and be really clear about definitions, terminology, and measurement, and make sure that, you know, when we do it right and do it once. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, John, for this really eye-opening presentation, and also for pointing out some do's and don'ts for plastic neutrality. I think that's been really valuable. Before we go over to the next presentation, we'd like to get you all involved here with 2 short polls. We would like to know, which elements of the plastic sustainability journey has your company already taken? You can select one or more of the following: comprehensive plastic footprint, internal measures to substitute, recycle, or recover plastic, targets for increasing recycling and reducing leakage, support of external measures to reduce plastic pollution, or none of the above. I will wait a bit more until we get some more answers, and then I'll share the results. So it's great to see. It looks like a lot of you have already taken some of the elements. Over 40 or 45% have already internal measures to substitute, recycle, or recover plastic. So that's great. I will now start the second poll, which is: in which of the following stewardship areas would your company be willing to invest additional resources? So for example, in the next 2 years, plastic footprint, internal actions to avoid plastic leakage, support external projects reducing plastic pollutions, or none of the above. And we see that there are a lot of companies, especially with regards to support of external projects reducing plastic pollution, a lot of companies or organizations would be willing to support them. So that's really great to see. Thanks a lot for taking part in this poll. And now I would like to hand over to our next speaker, Steve Hardman from Plastic Collective. Steve, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Hardman from Plastic Collective. Today, I'm going to talk to you about plastic credits and hopefully give you a perspective from a small community-based plastic recycling project, and then give you the perspective from a brand that buys the plastic credits from the community recycling project. Next slide. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Plastic Collective itself. We're a social enterprise that is family owned and operated, and we empower small, remote, vulnerable, Indigenous communities to, be empowered to tackle the plastic waste epidemic. The inhabitants of these communities make up almost half the world's population, and despite this, these are often the forgotten communities in the plastic waste epidemic. Next slide. Now, Plastic Collective addresses this problem by establishing community-based plastic recycling and recovery micro enterprises. We provide these micro enterprises with what we call the plastic collective system. Now that includes a containerized plastic recycling facility. Inside that recycling facility, it comes with a range of recycling technologies that produce a range of products. These products include sorted, clean, shredded plastic ready for resale into plastic recycling marketplaces. It also includes a range of products which can be used by the local community, and these include roof tiles, floorboards, and fence posts. They can also produce diesel fuel from the pyrolysis equipment that we provide them, which can be used to operate the recycling facility in the first place, or can be used by the local community as well. And finally, we facilitate them to produce plastic credits, which we deem as a product as well. The plastic collective system, actually, go back to the previous slide. Sorry, Ramon. Yeah, the plastic collective system also includes a software system as well, which wraps around this hardware solution. And this enables the projects to manage the recycling supply chain. It also enables them to transact with plastic collectors, and also is a verification and compliance tool to ensure that the projects are operating in compliance with the accounting and ethical standards that Patrick spoke about. Next slide. So we're currently working on building a network of community-based projects around the world. There's some images of some of the communities that we've established already, some that we've got in the queue ready to go. And we're hopeful over the next coming years to produce, have several thousand communities that we're working with. Next slide. We've been committed to environmental issues for the past 25 years, in particular my sister, who founded this business. For the last 2 years, we've been developing the plastic collective system, testing and piloting the system in various projects throughout the Asia Pacific region and within Australia. And in this last year, we've been fortunate enough to be awarded a major grant by the Australian government to develop our solution further and commercially roll it out around the world. Next slide. So here we are today, and it's becoming increasingly critical for brands to have a credible sustainability strategy. It's likely, and this is only our view at the moment, but it's likely that the COVID will accelerate this, making it an imperative for brands to participate in the planet's rehabilitation. And addressing the plastic waste epidemic is a key part of the planet's rehabilitation. Next slide. So what I'll do now is I'll show you a case study on Les Village, which is a project we operate in the north of Bali. Next slide. So Les Village is not like the Bali that most of us would know. It's a relatively remote part of Bali and a very quiet area, and its 4,000 inhabitants work predominantly in fishing, salt production, and very light tourism. 80% of plastic leaks into the environment, or used to leak into their environment, and it would be burnt, buried, or thrown into the ocean. And this is largely because they have no coordinated waste management systems and historically no plastic recovery and recycling activities. So around about 80 tons of material has historically leaked into the environment around this relatively small community. Next slide. So since Plastic Collective got involved with Les Village and we established the micro enterprise there, which was around about 9 months ago, they've initiated plastic recovery from households, schools, and waterways. They processed a significant volume of plastic, and those volumes are increasing as every month goes by. They've sorted, cleaned, and graded plastic shred ready for sale to brands. We're currently working on two deals for them to sell their plastic shred to a sunglasses manufacturer. And the second deal we're working on for them is to sell their plastic shred to a cosmetic company for their cosmetic packaging. They've also sold plastic credits to a toilet paper manufacturer. I'll come back to that in a case study shortly. And they're about to sell their plastic recycling credits to a beverage maker. So just to note, the credit sales that they've been doing thus far are in advance of the official plastic credit market, which will be hopefully launched next year. But the sales and the pilot activity in Bali is actually part of the official plastic standard pilot activity. So we are applying the official standards, albeit in a draft format. Okay, so on the slide you're looking at here, we have the business model for Les Village. Now, lots of numbers. Don't worry too much about the numbers. The point here is that these projects that we operate all must be sustainable. Of course, it goes without saying, and it really emphasises the point that these must be profitable. We've had several occasions where this project or other projects have got nervous about the viability of the project. And the revenues that they would generate, and the project instantly stops. If the project stops, plastic stops getting collected. So you can see here, it's really trying to demonstrate that the critical nature of the profitability of these projects, but also the key role that the plastic credits play in making a project like this profitable. In this case, and pretty much all of the projects we work with, they can only be profitable if plastic credits are sold. And the reason for this is their remote nature invariably requires them to incur substantial freight costs in order to move plastic material to somewhere where it has value, typically an urban area. And so the plastic credits in the context of a small project like this, of which we anticipate having many of these around the world, are an absolute game changer for the viability and success of them and for their ongoing sustainability. Okay, next slide. So now let's move from the case study with the community project. We'll move to a brand that is purchasing credits from that project. Global Good is a toilet paper manufacturer, as you can probably see, and they are basing their marketing on very strong sustainability credentials. They make their toilet paper out of bamboo, and their plastic sustainability strategy is very important to them as well. Next slide. Now, as John, pointed out from WWF in the last presentation, companies should do everything they possibly can to reduce their plastic footprint, reuse plastic material and recycle plastic material before they get to plastic credits. And this is certainly the case here. However, in their case, they simply cannot find a material for their primary packaging to prevent moisture entering the product, the toilet paper itself. So they are, for the time being, have very little choice but to use plastic in their primary packaging. Now, to address this, they buy plastic credits to amount that match their plastic footprint. Their plastic footprint is 12 tonnes. Is projected to be 12 tonnes, and they buy those 12 tonnes of credits, which then funds 12 tonnes of plastic to be collected from the Les Village project. Having done this, they can claim to be plastic neutral, and this will cost them about $20,000, which equates to around about 3 cents per 12 pack of toilet paper. So that's about 0.5% of the product at retail price. Next slide. So then, in addition to being able to make the claim about being plastic neutral, they can also draw upon a raft of co-benefits that can bolster their sustainability narrative. And these claims can include facilitating community education and training, which we do with the projects, building skills and capacity within the communities, which we also do, encouraging and developing local employment. So in the case of Les Village, there's 5 people employed from that project. Profit is generated. They can claim the profit that is generated goes to a worthy cause within the community. In the case of Les Village, they're actually setting up general waste management activities for the first time ever, using the profit from the plastic recycling. They can also claim they're preventing plastic from being burnt, buried and dumped in the ocean around this community, and they're helping create a healthy and clean environment for the inhabitants of that community. And all of this happens within a beautiful location with lovely people, palm trees, beaches and lots of sun. So you can see plastic credits in this context are a very affordable way for a brand to build sustainability credentials. And I've tried to give you a view here of both sides of the plastic credits, the buyers and the sellers, and the benefits that are attributed to each of them. So I hope you find that useful. Please ask any questions in the Q&A, or feel free to look me up on LinkedIn anytime.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think it's extremely helpful to get an insight into your projects to better understand the concept of plastic neutrality. So big thank you for that. And again, we have prepared a little poll. Let's see if we can get the participation rate even higher. The first poll will be, how would you rate the potential of plastic credits as a solution to finance plastic collection and recycling projects? It could be high, medium, low, or you don't know, meaning that your company or your organization would purchase plastic credits. So here we see the results. We see that the medium was the winner, so about 44% say they would rate the potential as medium. It's really good for us to know. I think it's great to see that companies or organizations are in general open, but there also remains some skepticism, so thank you for that. Let me launch the second poll of this round, which is, what types of credit generating project activities would you prioritize? Community waste recovery, so collection from the environment, financing waste pickers who pick recyclable material, ocean cleanup efforts, development of new or the improvement of waste recovery systems, or none of the above. And I will share the results. So looks as if our winner is community waste recovery, so collection from the environment. And also the development of new or the improvement of already existing waste recovery system as 55%. So thanks a lot for your participation. I think these results are very valuable for us to see and will of course be taken into account when we further develop standards and projects. Next, I'd like to hand over to Giorgio. Please, the word is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Julia. Thank you to all of you that you are still here to listen to me and listen to this very interesting webinar. Thank you to South Pole for the invitation. And now I wanted to take you to a completely different environment. So I wanted to take you in a cruise, and I am part of MSC Cruises. MSC Cruises, please slide. MSC Cruises is Roman, please. Can you go to the slide? Yeah, is part of a very big group. Is a MSC group, which is a group of shipping containers, group of port operation and terminal operation, and ferries, with a big company, which is a family company, and maybe also the fact of being a family company has been important for the project that we have done. Please slide. MSC Cruises is a global player, so everything that I will tell you today, everything that I tell you is it should be understand as a global impact, because cruises are per se an industry which is global, which is traveling all around the globe, which is traveling everywhere, And so the difficulties and the challenges are something that should be seen in a global way. For this, we have also a pool, and we wanted to ask you how big is the cruise industry? So how much is the entity, the total output worldwide? Is it of 15 billion? Is it of 70 billion? Or is it of 133 billion? So I let you the time to vote. Okay, so very good, very good. I think it is great. So very big, as you can see. Everybody of you are well aware of the dimension of the cruise industry, which is indeed 134 billion US dollar overall. These are data from the Cruise Line Industry Association related to years 2018. So what is a cruise? I don't know how many of you have ever made a cruise, but a cruise is a restaurant, is entertainment, is on bars, is spa, is really a town. So when we started the project regarding the plastic reduction, I was really in difficulties, because it was just like, oh my God, where do I start from? We are perfectly, we are overwhelmed by plastic. We have plastic everywhere. And please slide. And we decided to make this project. And in order, let's call this a journey instead of project. And to start with this, we should start mapping what we had all around us, what was surrounding us. Then we had to understand what we were counting, so the mapping with actions, because we did not do this only for understanding or for counting, but we did this in order to make actions and then to implement. So in order to reduce, really reduce the impact of our company and the impact of cruises as plastic. And then the last part of a journey, which is still ongoing, which is a continuous improvement, because we have not yet finished. We have studied, we have made a lot of things, but we are still studying and we are still doing something. What does it mean, studying? It means making benchmark with the external organization, the World Economic Forum, United Nations, but also many NGOs, many foundations, in order to understand how the others were doing this and the best in class were doing this. And counting all the tail items, all the food packaging, counting the beverage packaging, shop items with plastic, single-use plastic, as wrapped in single-use plastic, and defining the scope of a project. Now, as I think many of you know very well, when a big company is making a big project, you need to involve all the company. You need to involve the company from the top management to all the colleagues. Slide, please. Which are the actions that we have seen through the metrics of our items? So just imagine a very big list of items, and the action that we have applied to each category of items. The first is reduce. So whenever it was possible, we have cut down any possible consumption. Replace. So when we could not replace, but we could not reduce, we have replaced the items with sustainable ones. When we could not reduce and we could not replace, then eventually we have recycled with a huge project of recycling on board, dividing the items, recycling, and also making negotiation and making organization and agreement with external company in order to be sure that the recycle was real recycled. And which were the actions, the practical actions. Example number one is, this is very iconic, I think. Every time we speak about plastic and the plastic in the sea, we speak about straws. So the first thing that we have done was to make the straws available, so only upon request. I mean, I'm also a consumer. I love gin tonic, and but I don't use a straw. But every time I was going on board, as in many bars in the world, when I ask for a gin tonic, it is served with a straw. For me, it is not not a single-use straw. It is a no-use straw. So the first thing that we have done was to eliminate the straw as a default item in the drinks and make this available upon request. This has also meant to train all the bars, to make a huge communication. And this also lead us to a reduction from 90 million of plastic straw to 9 million of compostable straws. So the double action of reduce and replace. Another example is regarding packaging. Packaging, you're also for this, I think you are very used to. In the hotellerie, it is very used to have individual butter, individual jam, individual yogurt. It is very easy, very economic, very easy to handle from a sanitation point of view, from a health and sanitation point of view for everything, but it makes a lot of waste in plastic. This is also dirty plastic, so technically it is you should take it separate in order to have a good recycling and so on. So what we have done here is not only to change something, some packaging, like using some paper one, but in many cases, for instance, for yogurt, for jam, we have completely changed the service with bulk and service operation. And in some cases, we have also eliminated the items where we could not find the real solution. We have eliminated the items. We have decided, for instance, to eliminate the creamer because we could not find an alternative packaging, and so we have served milk. This has been a journey with the suppliers. So in the last 3 years, we have purchased 10,000 sunbeds. And sunbeds, usually sunbeds are plastic and are in aluminium, and they can be scratched during the logistics. So if they were coming usually, and this is the standard in the industry, they were coming completely wrapped in plastic. So we have worked with the production, and we have found that the layers of carton with carton foils would have been a very great solution, and about 75% of plastic reduction. This was, let's say, easy, the more easy than the other example, which is for detergent, because the detergents, please slide, the detergents comes in plastic bottles if they are liquid. So we have worked with a very big company of a manufacturer of detergents, and we have changed completely the items from liquid to solid. And in this way, we were able to decrease the plastic packaging dramatically. Imagine when you do your dishwashing with your dishwasher machine at home, and you have the single tablet with a very thin plastic, which is compostable plastic, with something similar, let's say. So, and with this, we have again, with this, we have worked with the production, we have worked with the company, we have worked with equipment on board, we have made many tests, but we eventually reached this. We have not yet finished. We are really in an ongoing journey. So next slide. We have still to do something. We still have on board plastic bottled water, which we have an extensive recycling process for this. So we collect all the plastic bottles, we recycle, we have made agreements with external companies that are collecting and recycling properly, but we are working also for substituting this probably with mineral water produced on board and refilling station. This means that the journey has been an amazing journey. It has been really interesting. We are much more, we are professional, we are also fathers of family, and we are very proud of this, but the journey is not yet finished. One last word. You know that with the coronavirus, the tourism has been very affected, and with the tourism also the cruise industry. Now in this moment, MSC Cruises does not have passengers on board, we have stopped our operation and our ships. And but obviously, as soon as the social gathering will start again, as soon as we will go back together with our friends in restaurants, in bars, and in holiday, we will start again cruises, and I really hope to have also you on board and to cruise together in a sustainable way. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you again, Julia and South Pole, for the possibility of sharing something in these words.
Thanks a lot, Giorgio. It's great to get an insight into your plastic strategy and to hear what has already been done, which is a lot, and what is still planned. So thanks a lot for joining. We have received several questions in our question box, and I'd now like to start the Q&A session. I will quickly read through the first question, which is for Patrick. Will there be a certification process for plastic credits?
Yes. So, and will you go one by one, or?
No, yeah, one by one.
Okay. Okay. Good. Yes. So that's exactly what is being developed under the RRR initiative. So the standard is being developed this year. So there is a first draft already that was up for public consultation until last week. Based on the public comments received, the standard will be further improved, and there will be a second public consultation in the fall. And then early next year, the project standard will be launched along with the registry system. And then from 2021 onwards, there will be the possibility to certify projects against the standard and issue plastic credits for plastic collection and recycling.
Thank you, Patrick. Another question is to WWF. I wanted to know why well-managed landfilling of low-quality unrecyclable plastics could not be seen as a short-term solution, as it does not release CO2 and prevents the release of plastics in the environment.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I don't recall saying that exact statement, but I think, you know, there are a range of kind of short-term and long-term solutions. I think possibly what I said was that landfilling is not a circular solution. You know, it is a short-term solution, and the challenge also is that, you know, sanitary landfills are a rarity in many of the countries which are facing the biggest plastic challenges. So, you know, I think if we can, in the short term, if there is the opportunity, if there's no other alternative that makes more sense, that, you know, putting it into a sanitary landfill that's well managed would probably be the right approach. But in the longer term, it's not a circular solution. It can't be considered sustainable to continually just you know, bury our waste, and we need to be thinking about the system differently.
Thank you, John. Another question for Patrick. How can a credit system avoid double counting and double payment, for example, in EPR systems? And there's a further comment. EPR systems are already funded by fees for the collection and recycling of the specific plastic items, so they should not be able to create credits.
Exactly, yeah. So that's the case, and the standard will accommodate for that. So one of the questions that the standards will be asked, that the standard will ask is always, is the recycling or collection activity already happening anyway because of waste management systems that are already in place, or things like extended producer responsibility schemes that provide already the right incentives and infrastructure to collect and recycle plastic. So in that case, this would be clearly considered the baseline or the business as usual scenario, and such a project would not be allowed to issue credits. However, there might be occasions where, even if an EPR scheme exists, some activities, for example, recycling of really difficult things like flexible packaging that is not recycled today for economic reasons, that was maybe just being incinerated or it was being sent to the landfill despite an APR scheme being in place. And if such a project could be set up on top of the APR scheme to go beyond what the APR scheme is doing today, then such an activity could be credited. So we always need to look at what's currently happening, what are the regulations that are in place, and then we need a very transparent and verifiable argument that whatever the project is doing goes beyond that, and that will then be checked by a third-party auditor and the standard setting body. So there will be a very robust checking process to make sure that these statements are really true and that there is an impact at the end of the day.
Great, thanks, Patrick. We have received a question for Steve. Where is the toilet paper in the case study sold? In Bali or somewhere else?
Okay, it's been a good question. The toilet paper actually is being launched in Australia at the moment, but it will be rolled out internationally in the fullness of time.
Okay, thank you. Then a question for Giorgio. Why is MSC moving to compostable plastic, since compostable plastic doesn't lead to any recovery of nutrition or other material? Wouldn't it be better to collect those items for recycling or to use them for energy recovery?
I mean, thank you very much for the question. We do a lot of things, let's say. So in some cases, so we are really studying item by item in order to find the best solution. And this is again a journey. I give you an example. For instance, in the first, we are using in the galley. Our cooks are using also traditionally some plastic single-use apron, which we were struggling to find an alternative. We found a compostable alternative, which was not the perfect one. So now we have moved on a cotton reusable apron. Obviously, there is it's not only a matter of one single item; it's a matter of a process and of the organization. But again, this is a journey, and we are trying to find each item by item the proper solution together with our internal resources and external partners and external help.
Great, thanks, Giorgio. Maybe one or two more to Patrick. Plastic stewardship and credits sound great. Are there financial sector partners you are working with to credit a market for plastic credits? There was no mention of their involvement of this critical partner or of government.
Very good question. So starting with the last one first, I think government has always a very important role to play. I think was highlighted by John. One, for example, easy step would be a ban on exports of plastics. So to make sure that the plastic waste we generate in developed countries stays here, and we try to, get solutions for that here instead of just exporting the problem to another place which might not be well equipped to handle that. And then on top of that, also things like EPR schemes or even sometimes bans of unnecessary single-use plastics. All these things are very welcome and needed, and I would say, probably a lot more impactful than voluntary plastic crediting schemes like the one we are working on. So I think what we are working on is supposed to complement policy, or maybe start a discussion where the willingness to act by policymakers is not there yet, and to show the way in terms of solutions. And in terms of finance, so the plastic fund we are working on, for example, that could be an interesting area where we would extend, I think, an invitation to the financial sector also to jump in and help us finance such plastic collection and recycling activities. And maybe another important role that the financial sector plays already in the climate change space, which is not happening on plastics yet, is if we had a proper plastic footprint of companies and more transparency towards disclosure of plastic footprints, the same thing that happens then with carbon footprints and disclosure through platforms like CDP. Usually then the investors that buy shares of the big brands, public listed equity, they then help to put a lot of pressure on the progress that these companies are making towards their pledges and their sustainability. So I feel that investors probably don't have enough data, or we don't have the transparency yet in the market for investors to play that role, but hopefully over time we will see the same kind of approach emerging like we have in climate.
Great, thanks, Patrick. And one last one, maybe also for Patrick or for John. Can someone please define plastic neutral? And given the losses in any recycling activity, how do you get to 100% and so be neutral?
John, do you want to start? Because I think you had some good recommendations on that term. Then I can maybe, or maybe Steve might be able to chip in as well.
I'll give a, I mean, at a high level, I don't think technically we should be using the word plastic neutral, because that's kind of suggesting that every piece of plastic a company puts out onto the market is actually recovered, which is not a claim that a plastic credit would actually enable a company to make. So I don't think we'd be supportive of the use of the word plastic neutrality. I think it'd be worth exploring what makes more sense, but at this point in time, the use of the concept of a plastic credit makes more sense than saying anything like plastic neutral.
Patrick, do you want to add, or?
Should I have a quick go? Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's a very good question. It's a very topical question as well. And it's a perfectly timed question because right as we speak, Vera and the 3R initiative is trying to work out what does it actually mean. And the development of the standards, which will also relate to the definitions and the claims that can be made, are being currently tested. We're testing the standards as we speak with the project that I mentioned in Bali. And this is a subject that gets brought up all the time. So over the next 6 months, this will be discussed at great pace, and a decision will be made. So if you have a view, pile into the feedback opportunities that are available via Vera and the 3R initiative to help us create a definition that works for everybody.
And maybe just a quick addition, and also here learning from the climate space, and I've been working on climate neutrality, for example, for the last 20 years. And if you look at the climate change, we haven't been able to agree as a community on a proper definition of climate neutrality for the last 20 years. So that shows how difficult these things can be, and often these claims, they have a life of their own. The way that company, because it's often then used by also the marketing and CSR departments of companies, and they add their own communications twist to it. And I think that the reason why plastic neutrality is so attractive is because it's a very short term that describes in very easy terms what companies are trying to do. But I do agree with John that the term neutrality in this context can be misleading, can sometimes even be risky and backfire, because once, I don't know, plastic waste has ended up in the ocean and a sea turtle died because it ingested that plastic, we can't bring that turtle back to life by buying a plastic credit. So, and then we see that the plastic discussion is a lot more emotional than the carbon credit or the carbon neutrality discussion, which is a bit abstract. And there, it's like a ton of CO2 in the atmosphere, reducing it someone else. It's easier even to make that climate neutrality claim, even though there is a lot of criticism there as well. So I do agree with John, we have to think about this and we have to try to get this right. But it's important also to mention the RRR standard will define what the plastic credit means, and that's essentially about measuring the impact of recovering or recycling 1 ton of CO2 of plastic in addition to what's happening today. But the standard won't define the term plastic neutrality. It's up then, I think, up for labels, maybe other organizations like, I think, WWF and other NGOs to help us define best practices and help coin certain terms from the beginning so that we move from day one in a harmonized and decent direction. And I can already say this has not been the case over the last few months, so that there is some work ahead of us.
Great, thank you, Patrick and John and Steve, for answering this question. I'd like to end this Q&A session now. In case we haven't answered your questions now, we will follow up by email. Thank you very much for participating in our Climate Chatter webinar on plastics. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you're interested, we're also organizing other webinars as part of our Climate Chatter series. The next will be on net zero next week, and we'd be happy to see you there as well. After the webinar, once we close it, a short survey will pop up, and we'd appreciate if you could quickly answer it so we can keep making our webinars better. Thanks again for joining, and stay healthy. Bye-bye.